There is a stillness that we rarely touch, not because it is far away or hidden, but because we are always running. Running toward goals, running from pain, running to stay busy, to stay relevant, to stay wanted. And in all that motion, we forget the one place that can truly hold us, the present moment. Not the kind of present moment we post about, not the curated kind that comes with a caption, but the raw, unfiltered now. The now that is uncomfortable, the now that holds both breath and burden. That's the space where life begins to whisper its truest teachings. When we slow down enough to notice it, we find that everything we've been seeking out there, peace, clarity, meaning, has been gently waiting inside us all along. But we've been too distracted to see it, too full of noise, too caught in the loop of becoming. We mistake stillness for stagnation, rest for laziness, gentleness for weakness. And yet the wisest among us, those who have truly touched life, have always returned to the same truth. Everything you need, everything that can bring you home, is already within you. But what does it mean to come home to yourself? For many, those words feel abstract, poetic even, but hard to hold. And that's because we've spent most of our lives being taught how to leave ourselves. From a young age, we learn how to disconnect. When we're told not to cry, we learn to silence our emotions. When we're punished for asking too many questions, we learn to suppress curiosity. When we're rewarded for achievements, but not presence, we learn to chase doing rather than being. Slowly, quietly, we build an identity out of adaptation. We become what pleases others. We become what gets us love, attention, safety. And in doing so, we forget who we really are beneath all the roles, masks, and layers. Coming home, then, isn't about discovering something new. It's about remembering. It's about peeling back the layers. It's about hearing your own voice again after years of echoes. And yes, it can be painful. Because in returning to yourself, you also come face to face with everything you've suppressed. The grief you never processed, the fear you've been pretending doesn't exist, the dreams you buried so deep that even you forgot they were once yours. But this confrontation isn't punishment, it's purification. It's not about judgment, it's about freedom. Because you cannot heal what you will not feel. You cannot reclaim what you have not faced. Buddhism invites us into this space with deep compassion. It doesn't demand that we be perfect. It simply invites us to be present, to observe without attachment, to feel without drowning, to notice the sensations, the thoughts, the waves, and to allow them rather than resist them. Resistance is what creates suffering. The pain itself is often manageable, but the story we build around it, the fear, the shame, the self-judgment, that's what makes it unbearable. What if instead of running from our pain, we sat beside it? What if we listened to it, not as an enemy, but as a messenger? Imagine your pain as a child, frightened, alone, misunderstood. Would you scream at that child? Would you push them away? Or would you kneel down, open your arms and say, "I'm here now"? That's what it means to heal. Not to conquer your pain, but to care for it, to hold it with tenderness, to understand that every part of you, yes, even the parts that make mistakes or feel lost, are worthy of love. And as you begin to hold yourself this way, something extraordinary happens. You begin to breathe differently. You begin to live slower. You start noticing the way sunlight moves across your room, the way wind brushes against your skin, the way silence feels less like emptiness and more like presence. Life doesn't change overnight, but your relationship to it does. You no longer need every situation to go your way. You no longer need people to agree with you to feel whole. You no longer grasp so tightly to outcomes because you're rooted in the moment. And the moment, despite everything, is enough. This is not a romanticized idea, it's a practice. A daily, humble, imperfect practice of coming back to the now, over and over. When your mind wanders, bring it back. When fear takes over, return to the breath. When anxiety starts building stories of catastrophe, place your hand on your heart and say, "We're okay right now." Because that's what most of our distress is. Stories, projections into the future, interpretations of the past. But the body lives in the now. The breath lives in the now. Peace lives in the now. And the more you live from this place, the more you begin to notice something else. Your own inner voice. Not the voice of fear, not the voice of expectation or memory, but the voice that has always been there. Quiet, gentle, wise. The one that whispers truth when the world is screaming noise. This voice does not demand or threaten. It guides. It nudges. It reminds you of what matters when you've forgotten. And learning to trust this voice is one of the greatest gifts of healing. Because when you trust yourself, you stop seeking validation from the outside. You stop giving your power away. You become sovereign. Not closed off, not cold, but sovereign. Whole within yourself. This sovereignty doesn't mean you don't need anyone. It means you no longer need to abandon yourself to be loved. It means you choose connections that honor your soul rather than your wounds. It means you begin to speak more truthfully, to love more freely, to live more lightly, because you're not performing anymore. You're simply being, and being is enough. But this isn't easy in a world that profits from your disconnection, from your insecurity, from your constant need to be more, do more, achieve more. It takes courage to slow down. It takes courage to say, I'm not chasing anymore. I'm not proving anymore. I'm coming home. And every time you do, you become a little more free. Not because life has become easier, but because you've stopped fighting yourself. That inner war, the one between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be, begins to quiet. And in that quiet, something beautiful emerges. Contentment. Contentment is different from happiness. Happiness is often tied to circumstances. Contentment is deeper. It's the peace that comes from accepting what is, even as you work for what could be. It's the smile that rises, not because everything is perfect, but because you are present. Because you are in harmony with yourself, even if the world around you is chaotic. And that harmony doesn't come from fixing every flaw. It comes from honoring your humanity, from letting yourself be imperfect and still worthy, from holding space for your contradictions, from loving the parts of you that are still healing. This is not passive, this is powerful. Because when you stop waiting to be flawless to love yourself, you begin to move through the world differently. You take risks, you speak up, you rest, you play, you forgive, you open. And life responds to that openness with its own quiet gifts. A conversation that warms your heart, a book that changes your thinking, a sunset that catches your breath. These aren't coincidences. These are the rewards of presence. The universe responds to presence, and presence begins with the decision to stop running, to stop judging, to stop chasing the life you think you're supposed to live, and start living the one that's here right now. So if you're tired, let yourself be tired. If you're sad, let yourself be sad. If you're uncertain, let that uncertainty be held, not solved. You don't need to know the next step to be worthy. You don't need a plan to be loved. You just need to be here, breathing, listening, being. The rest will come. It always does. There is a point in the healing journey where something strange begins to happen. You start to feel both heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because you're finally allowing yourself to feel the weight of everything you've carried, the heartbreak, the disappointments, the trauma you've silenced for years. But lighter too, because you're no longer carrying it alone. You're no longer pretending that it doesn't exist. You're no longer lying to yourself, saying you're fine when you're crumbling inside. That honesty, as painful as it is at first, begins to lift the invisible burden you've carried for so long. And when you finally acknowledge that pain, it doesn't overwhelm you the way you feared. It humbles you. It softens you. It cracks open the part of you that remembers what it means to be alive. For so long, you've been surviving, doing what you had to do, pushing through, wearing a brave face because you believed that strength meant endurance. But now you're beginning to understand a deeper truth. That strength isn't about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to put something down, when to stop, when to say, I've had enough. Not because you're weak, but because you finally remembered that you matter too. That moment, though subtle, becomes a turning point. It doesn't happen with a big announcement or some grand epiphany. It happens in a whisper, a breath, a moment when you look at yourself in the mirror, and instead of criticizing what you see, you meet your own eyes with a flicker of compassion. It's when you start asking not, "What's wrong with me?" but "What happened to me?" Not because you're blaming your past, but because you're finally ready to understand it, because you're done trying to outrun it. And when that shift happens, the healing deepens. You begin to unravel, slowly, gently, one thought at a time. You start to see how the way you react today is tied to wounds you haven't fully healed. How your need to overachieve, to be liked, to never disappoint, is all tied to moments when you were made to feel like your worth was conditional. You see how the things you fear most, rejection, abandonment, failure, aren't about the present, but about the parts of you that were never allowed to feel safe growing up. And suddenly it all starts to make sense. Not to excuse the behavior, but to understand it. And that understanding, it's the doorway to forgiveness, not just for others, but for yourself. Because when you see clearly, when you trace the threads back to their origin, you realize something deeply human. You were doing the best you could with what you knew at the time. Even the mistakes, even the choices you regret, even the people you stayed with too long or left too soon. You were trying to protect yourself, to feel loved, to survive. And now with more awareness, you can choose differently. Not because you hate who you were, but because you're learning to love who you are becoming. And who you are becoming isn't a destination, it's a devotion, a daily practice, a sacred tending to the self you once abandoned. Buddhism teaches us that awareness is the first step toward liberation. When you become aware of your patterns, your triggers, your old wounds, you don't just see them, you begin to disarm them. You stop believing every thought. You stop reacting from the same places. You begin to respond instead of react, to pause, to breathe, to ask yourself, what does this part of me need right now? That simple question is revolutionary, because for most of your life, you've been trained to ignore your needs, to serve others, to achieve, to keep moving. But now you're beginning to ask the question your inner child has been longing to hear for decades. What do you need, love? What do you really need? And sometimes the answer surprises you. It's not always grand. It's not always complicated. Sometimes it's a nap, a glass of water, a walk outside without your phone. Sometimes it's turning off the news. Sometimes it's reaching out to a friend and saying, I just need to hear a kind voice. Sometimes it's letting yourself cry without trying to explain why. And sometimes it's looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I forgive you. I'm not going to abandon you anymore. That's what healing is. 1,000 small acts of self-loyalty. Not because you're selfish, but because you finally understand that the world cannot receive you fully until you do. That your relationships will only be as honest as your relationship with yourself. That your joy will only be as deep as your self-acceptance. That your peace will only be as real as your boundaries. And so you begin again, every morning, every breath, choosing to be on your own side. Even when you mess up, even when you forget, especially then. And the more you walk this path, the more you realize how much of life is happening inside you, not around you. Peace isn't about controlling the world. It's about finding the part of you that stays steady in the chaos. Joy isn't about constant happiness. It's about learning how to open your heart even when it aches. And love, true love, isn't about being chosen by someone else. It's about choosing yourself over and over until your soul knows that it is safe, that it is held, that it is home. Coming home is not a one-time event. It's a return, a remembering, and it happens slowly. At first, it feels unfamiliar. You're used to leaving yourself behind. You're used to being in your head, planning, worrying, rehearsing conversations that haven't even happened. But then you catch yourself. You take a breath, you feel your feet on the ground, and you come back. And with every return, the path becomes clearer. Your nervous system begins to trust you. Your body begins to soften. Your heart begins to open. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer resisting it. You begin to allow. That word, allow, becomes your mantra. You allow your feelings without labeling them. You allow your body to rest when it's tired. You allow your mind to wander without punishment. You allow your healing to take the time it needs. You allow yourself to be a beginner again, to try new things, to fail, to learn, to love again, even after loss, to dream again, even after disappointment. And perhaps most sacred of all, you begin to allow others to be as human as you are. You stop holding them to impossible standards. You stop expecting perfection. You stop needing them to meet all your needs. You begin to meet people where they are, with compassion, not because you're a doormat, but because you've created such safety within yourself that you no longer need to control what's outside of you. You can love without losing yourself. You can forgive without forgetting your worth. You can hold space for others while still holding boundaries for yourself. This is the quiet power of healing. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It moves like water, gentle, persistent, transformative. It carves a new path in you, one that leads not to someone new, but back to the truest version of who you've always been. The one who knew how to wonder, the one who laughed too loud, the one who danced without rhythm, the one who felt deeply and loved without caution. That self is still here, waiting, not for you to be perfect, but for you to be present. And as you become more present, you begin to see beauty in places you used to overlook. You notice the way light falls on your skin, the way a song can transport you, the way a stranger's smile can soften your day. You begin to feel life again, not as something to master, but as something to savor. Every moment becomes a teacher. Every breath becomes a gift. You're not running anymore. You're walking slowly, deliberately, with your hand on your heart and your eyes wide open. You're not chasing healing. You're embodying it, living it, breathing it, becoming it. And with each step, you whisper, I'm here now. I'm not leaving myself again. I am home. There comes a point, somewhere in the quiet space between awareness and acceptance, where something inside of you shifts. It's not an earthquake, not some loud disruption that knocks you off your feet. It's more subtle, like a door you didn't realize was closed, slowly creaking open, letting in a breath of air you forgot you needed. That shift is the beginning of a kind of peace, not the glittering peace that comes with achievement or praise, but the tender, unshakable kind that starts to grow once you've stopped fighting your own reflection. For most of your life, you've been at war with yourself, not intentionally, not maliciously, but every time you silenced your truth to keep someone else comfortable, every time you dismissed your needs in the name of being good or strong, every time you looked in the mirror and saw a problem instead of a person, you deepened that war. It's no wonder you feel exhausted. It's no wonder your heart feels heavy. You've spent so long performing a version of yourself that the real you has started to feel like a stranger. And yet deep inside, you've always known there's more. Not more you need to become, but more of you waiting to be remembered, waiting to be welcomed home. The moment you begin to lay down your weapons, your perfectionism, your self-criticism, your endless pursuit of external validation, is the moment you start to feel the first stirrings of real healing. It doesn't arrive like a sudden wave of clarity. It arrives like breath, gentle, repetitive, life-giving. It teaches you that healing isn't something you earn. It's something you allow. It's something you lean into over and over until your nervous system begins to believe it is safe to rest, until your heart believes it no longer needs to fight to be seen, until your soul believes it doesn't have to hustle for worth. But even then, healing isn't linear. You'll have days where you forget everything you've learned, days where you spiral back into old thought patterns, days where your triggers feel louder than your progress. And those days aren't failures. They're invitations. Invitations to practice grace, to return to yourself, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Buddhism reminds us again and again that suffering comes not from what happens, but from our attachment to how we believe things should be. That applies to our pain too. We suffer more when we believe healing should look a certain way, that we should be further along, that we shouldn't feel this anymore. But what if you stop fighting the timeline? What if you let yourself heal at the pace of your own breath, not someone else's expectations? What if you believe that even the setbacks were sacred, that even your most vulnerable days were part of the becoming? Because the truth is, Healing is not about erasing your wounds. It's about learning how to carry them differently, how to hold them with reverence instead of shame, how to see them not as stains on your worth, but as stories your body still remembers and wants you to listen to. And when you finally listen, when you stop trying to silence the hurt and instead ask it, "What are you trying to tell me?" you start to hear things you've never allowed yourself to hear before. You hear the voice of your inner child, the one who was never comforted when the world felt too loud, whispering, "Please don't leave me again." You hear the voice of your younger self, the one who was heartbroken and tried to pretend everything was fine, quietly asking, "Can I cry now?" You hear the voice of your present self, exhausted from years of holding it all together, saying, "Can we rest for a while?" And in listening to these voices, you realize you are the one you've been waiting for. You are the one who can hold these parts of yourself with the tenderness they've always deserved. No one else can do that for you. Yes, others can support you, they can love you, they can walk beside you, but the deep inner repair, the sacred stitching together of your own soul, that is a task only you can do, and it starts with presence, with staying, with choosing not to abandon yourself, even when everything in you wants to shut down or run away. Presence is not just sitting quietly with your breath, although that's part of it. Presence is the way you respond to yourself in the moments you feel least lovable. It's the voice you use inside your head when you make a mistake. It's the way you speak to your body when it's in pain. It's the permission you give yourself to be human. Beautifully, messily, imperfectly human. And the more you practice that kind of presence, the more you realize that healing is less about doing and more about undoing. Undoing the armor. Undoing the beliefs that told you your value was in your productivity. Undoing the habits that kept you distracted from yourself. Undoing the lies you told yourself to stay safe. There's grief in that undoing. Grief for all the years you spent hiding, for all the times you betrayed your own heart, for all the dreams you deferred because you didn't believe you were worthy of them. Let yourself grieve. Let the tears come when they need to. You are not weak for crying. You are releasing. You are emptying out what no longer belongs so that there is space for something new to grow. And what grows from that space is not a new version of you. It is the real you, the one who was never broken, only buried, the one who speaks softly but knows their worth, the one who walks gently but stands firmly in truth, the one who no longer seeks approval because they have finally approved of themselves. In this space of self-approval, everything begins to change. Not overnight, not all at once, but steadily, consistently, profoundly. You begin to attract different people, not because you're trying to, but because your energy has shifted. You no longer tolerate disrespect, not because you're angry, but because you're in alignment. You no longer chase love, not because you've given up on it, but because you've found it within. You no longer fear being alone, because you've discovered how nourishing your own company can be. And from this foundation of self-connection, you begin to live differently. You say no without guilt. You say yes without fear. You take up space, not with arrogance, but with authenticity. You speak more honestly, even when your voice shakes. You rest more deeply, even when the world tells you to hustle. You dream more freely, even when you don't know how it will all work out. You trust, not because you know the outcome, but because you've learned how to trust yourself. And that trust becomes your compass, your anchor, your quiet revolution. Because in a world that constantly asks you to leave yourself behind, choosing to come home is radical. It is an act of rebellion, and it is an act of love. So if you find yourself in the messy middle, if you're not where you used to be, but not yet where you want to be, breathe. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are in the process of remembering, of shedding, of softening. And that process is sacred. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to stay with yourself, to choose presence over perfection, to choose truth over performance, to choose love over fear, again and again and again. And if no one has told you lately, you're doing beautifully. Even if it doesn't feel like it, even if you can't see it, your healing is not invisible. It is happening in every breath you take, In every story you rewrite, in every choice to stay soft when the world asks you to harden. Keep going. You are not alone. You are healing. You are home. Healing has a strange way of making you feel lost before you feel found. There's a part of the journey that feels like floating in the middle of an ocean with no land in sight. You've left behind the old, the familiar, the patterns that once defined you, but the new hasn't quite formed yet. And in that in-between, the mind panics. It tells you to turn back, to cling to what you knew, to run back to the old story, even if it hurt, because at least you knew how to survive in it. The mind loves certainty, even if that certainty is laced with pain. But the soul is braver. The soul is patient. The soul whispers, stay here. Trust this. Keep going. And if you can learn to listen to that whisper, if you can sit with the discomfort of not knowing, something beautiful starts to unfold. This is the sacred pause, the quiet space before the becoming. It's not glamorous. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't get applause. But it's where the roots grow. It's where the foundation is laid. It's where you begin to build a relationship with yourself that's not based on doing or achieving or being seen. It's based on being, just being. And being in a world that constantly asks you to perform is the bravest thing you can do. Because when you stop performing, you're left with what's real, the rawness, the ache, the truth. This is the sacred pause, the quiet space before the becoming. It's not glamorous. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't get applause. But it's where the roots grow. It's where the foundation is laid. It's where you begin to build a relationship with yourself that's not based on doing or achieving or being seen. It's based on being, just being. And being in a world that constantly asks you to perform is the bravest thing you can do. Because when you stop performing, you're left with what's real, the rawness, the ache, the truth. And it's only from that rawness that something authentic can be born. You start to notice what really matters. The little things, the sacred things, the way your breath moves in your chest, the way silence wraps around you like a blanket, the way you feel when you stop trying to be impressive and start trying to be present. You realize that the world will always have its demands. It will always pull at you, try to convince you that you're not enough, that you need to be more, do more, fix more. But you begin to see through to question the pace. You begin to wonder, what am I racing toward, an illusion? You begin why? That question alone begins to change everything. Because when you stop racing, you begin to feel. When you stop numbing, you begin to listen. When you stop pleasing everyone else, you begin to ask yourself, what do I want? And maybe for the first time, you don't have an answer. Maybe that question terrifies you. Maybe it cracks open something inside you that you've buried under years of responsibility and expectation. But let it crack you open. Let the old identities fall away. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to stay in the room, with your breath, with your body, with your truth. There's something holy about choosing to stay with yourself through the unraveling. It's easy to love yourself when everything is going well, when you feel strong and clear and aligned. But to love yourself in the mess, to love yourself in the confusion, that's the real work. That's the real healing. And it's not always pretty. Some days it looks like crying on the floor. Some days it looks like turning off your phone and hiding under the covers. Some days it looks like showing up to your commitments with red eyes and a shaky voice. But you still show up. You still keep going. And that quiet resilience, that gentle refusal to abandon yourself, is what will carry you through. And through it all, you start to build trust. Not just with yourself, but with life. You begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, you're being guided. That maybe the pain wasn't punishment. Maybe it was initiation. Maybe it was clearing the space for something deeper, something truer, something that wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't been broken open. Buddhism teaches that the lotus grows in the mud, not in clear water, not in pristine conditions, but in the dirt, in the mess. And that metaphor begins to take on new meaning. You realize that the messiness of your life, the mistakes, the heartbreaks, the uncertainty, are not signs of failure. They're signs of growth, of life, of blooming. You begin to carry yourself differently. You walk a little slower, speak a little softer, breathe a little deeper. Not because you're fragile, but because you're rooted. You're no longer rushing to prove something. You're no longer trying to be someone. You're just being you. And in that being, there is so much peace, so much beauty, so much freedom. That freedom begins to shape your choices. You say no more often, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. You say yes more selectively, not out of fear, but out of alignment. You stop chasing things that don't nourish you. You stop clinging to people who drain you. You start honoring the seasons of your soul, the times of growth, the times of rest, the times of shedding. And you stop apologizing for needing time, for needing space, for needing to do things differently than others. Because you know now that healing is not a race. It's not a competition. It's not a performance. It's a deeply personal, deeply spiritual journey that unfolds at its own pace. And your only job is to keep showing up, to keep listening, to keep returning again and again to the present moment, to the breath, to the now. And in doing that, you start to notice miracles, not the big dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up in the way your body relaxes when you say something honest, the way your eyes soften when you see yourself with compassion, the way your heart opens when you realize you don't need to earn love. You just need to receive it. Those moments are everything. They are the fruit of your labor, the reward of your devotion. And as you deepen into this new way of being, something else begins to shift. Your relationship with others. You start to see people more clearly. You stop trying to fix them. You stop trying to save them. You stop needing them to be a certain way in order for you to feel okay. You begin to honor their journey as sacred, just as you're learning to honor yours. You love more freely, more bravely, more honestly. And sometimes that love means letting go. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with peace, with gratitude, with trust. You realize that not everyone is meant to walk the whole path with you. Some were only meant for a chapter. Some were there to teach you something. Some were mirrors. Some were lessons. And that's okay. You no longer hold on out of fear. You release with faith, and that faith becomes your foundation. You trust that what's meant for you will find you, that the people who are aligned with your soul will stay, that the love you're looking for is already growing inside you. And with that trust, you begin to live differently. Not from scarcity, but from abundance. Not from fear, but from love. Not from doubt, but from presence. This is the gift of healing. It doesn't give you a perfect life. It gives you a real one. A life where you feel everything deeply, where you connect honestly, where you rest when you're tired and speak when you're ready and love without needing to be anyone but yourself. And in that life you thrive, not because you've finally become someone new, but because you've finally come home to who you've always been. There is a strange and beautiful truth about healing that no one really prepares you for. It doesn't always feel like light. Sometimes healing feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like loneliness so thick it wraps around your ribs and steals your breath. Sometimes it feels like rage that you didn't even know you were holding, trembling beneath your skin like a volcano waiting to erupt. And yet all of it is part of the process. All of it is welcome, because healing isn't only about feeling better. It's about feeling everything. It's about allowing what has long been buried to rise, to breathe, to be acknowledged. Not to linger forever, but to finally be set free. You can't release what you refuse to feel. You can't transform what you won't touch. So the pain comes back, not to punish you, but to be heard. The sadness knocks on your chest, not to drown you, but to ask for a place to rest. The anger pulses in your veins, not because it wants to consume you, but because it's tired of being locked away. And when you finally stop pushing these parts of you away, when you turn toward them and say, "I see you, I'm listening," something sacred begins to happen. The shame starts to dissolve. The fear begins to soften. The hurt loosens its grip. You become a safe place for yourself, not a battlefield, not a war zone, but a sanctuary. And what a gift that is, to finally become your own sanctuary, to be the one place where you don't have to pretend, where you don't have to wear a mask, where you don't have to explain why you're still carrying wounds from years ago. You begin to understand that the soul doesn't operate on society's timeline. There is no expiration date for grief, no deadline for healing. Some wounds take time, some lessons take a lifetime. And that's okay, because this is not about speed, it's about depth, it's about truth, it's about integrity, it's about living in alignment with who you really are, not who you were taught to be. And that journey, it's not always forward. Sometimes you revisit the same lesson a dozen times before it really lands. Sometimes the same pain shows up in a new disguise. Sometimes you feel like you're going in circles, but in truth, you're spiraling deeper. Returning to the same place, but with new eyes, new awareness, new strength. That spiral is not regression, it's refinement. It's the soul's way of polishing the rough edges, of chiseling away at everything that is not love. Not the kind of love you perform, but the kind that simply is. Unconditional, eternal, ever-present. As you walk this spiral, you start to pay attention to the patterns, the habits, the automatic reactions that once ruled you. You begin to notice the ways you self-abandon, the ways you stay silent when you want to scream, the ways you make yourself small to keep others comfortable. And in that noticing, you reclaim your power. You start to choose differently, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. You speak when your voice shakes. You rest when the world demands your energy. You say no without justifying. You say yes only when it feels true. And slowly you rebuild trust with yourself. Because trust is not just about belief, it's about behavior. It's about consistency. It's about showing up for yourself in the moments when you've historically walked away. That kind of self-loyalty is revolutionary, especially if you've spent your life prioritizing others, especially if your worth was measured by your usefulness, your kindness, your obedience, especially if you were praised more for how well you hid your pain than how bravely you expressed it. But now you're learning a different way. You're learning that boundaries are not walls, they are bridges. They are how you protect your peace so that your heart can remain open. They are how you teach others to honor your humanity. They are how you stop the bleeding. And yes, boundaries can be painful at first, especially when you start setting them with people who were only comfortable with your silence, who benefited from your compliance, who loved the version of you that didn't ask for much. But the cost of keeping those people comfortable is too high. It costs you your spirit, your joy, your truth, and you are no longer willing to pay that price. You realize now that peace isn't passive, it's powerful. It doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means being rooted enough in yourself that you can face discomfort without collapsing, that you can walk away from what no longer serves you without guilt, that you can sit in the fire of transformation and trust that you won't be burned, you'll be reborn. And with each rebirth, you begin to meet parts of yourself you've never known, parts that were buried beneath trauma, beneath conditioning, beneath shame. You meet the you who speaks her mind, the you who dances when no one's watching, the you who cries without apology, the you who dreams without restraint, the you who rests without guilt. These parts aren't new, they're ancient. They're the essence of who you've always been. They're the truth that was never destroyed, only forgotten. And the more you remember, the more you soften, the more you open. The more you realize that healing doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means becoming more of who you really are. And that version of you, she's radiant, he's magnetic. They are whole, not because they've never been broken, but because they've learned how to hold their brokenness with grace. You begin to live differently. You stop waiting for permission. You stop needing to be chosen. You stop performing for a love that doesn't see you. You start creating a life that reflects your values, your vision, your truth. You create rituals that nourish you. Mornings filled with intention, evenings filled with reflection, conversations that leave you feeling seen, movement that feels like prayer, stillness that feels like a hug. You begin to choose alignment over approval, and that choice liberates you. It liberates your voice. It liberates your body. It liberates your heart. You realize that you were never too much. You were just living in a world that asked you to be less. But not anymore. You are reclaiming your space, your light, your life. And yes, the journey is far from over. There will be more shadows, more lessons, more shedding. But now you know how to walk through the dark. You know how to reach for your breath when fear tightens your chest. You know how to speak to yourself with kindness when shame tries to take over. You know how to find the calm within, even when the storm rages around you. You've become the safe place you were always searching for. And that is everything. Because from this place of safety, anything is possible. From this place of grounded presence, you can create, you can connect, you can love without losing yourself. You can hold space for others without abandoning your needs. You can show up in the world not as a performance, but as a presence that says, I am here, fully, freely, fiercely. I am not perfect, but I am whole. I have been broken, but I am not ashamed. I am soft and I am strong. I am enough, not because I've done enough, but because I am enough. That's the voice of healing. That's the frequency of truth. That's the language your soul speaks when it is finally safe to be seen. So if you are in the thick of it, if the grief feels endless, if the pain feels too loud, if the progress feels invisible, know this: you are not going backward. You are going deeper. You are not falling apart. You are falling into alignment. You are not too late. You are right on time. And this version of you, the one who is learning how to stay, how to feel, how to soften, this version is sacred. This version is sovereign. This version is worthy of celebration, not because they finished the healing journey, but because they've finally chosen to walk it. And every step matters. Every breath, every boundary, every tear, every truth spoken out loud. They all matter. They are all part of the miracle that is you, becoming, remembering, returning. You are not alone. You never were. There is a gentle power in realizing that you no longer need to wait to feel whole. For years, maybe most of your life, you've been told, by people, by systems, by your own conditioned mind, that peace, contentment, and worthiness lie somewhere in the future. That once you've healed enough, changed enough, succeeded enough, then you'll be okay. But what if that was never true? What if the wholeness you've been seeking isn't waiting for you out there, in some version of life that hasn't yet arrived, but already lives within you, quietly, patiently, fully present beneath the noise? The most profound moments in healing don't come from reaching some final destination. They come from waking up one morning and realizing you didn't need to become someone else to be worthy of love. They come from seeing that your sadness, your anger, your mistakes, your softness, they don't make you flawed. They make you real. And being real, being fully human, is not a problem to solve. It's a truth to honor, a beauty to reclaim, a life to live. You begin to understand that the voice in your head, the one that tells you you're behind, that you should be further along, that you're not doing enough, that voice isn't the truth. It's an echo, an old recording shaped by years of living in survival mode, of measuring your value by how much you produced, pleased, or perfected. But just because that voice is loud doesn't mean it's right. And healing isn't about silencing that voice entirely. It's about no longer believing it. It's about hearing the voice of shame, and instead of shrinking, saying, "Not today." It's about hearing the voice of doubt and responding with, "I see you, but I choose differently." It's about choosing love over fear, even when fear is the more familiar voice. And that choice, over and over, breath by breath, is what begins to shift everything. Not suddenly, not all at once, but steadily, subtly, powerfully. You start to live differently. You stop moving from urgency. You stop rushing to fix things that don't need fixing. You begin to trust the natural rhythm of your own life. You begin to see that every season has purpose, that rest is not a waste, that stillness is not stagnation, that softness is not weakness. You start to align with your body instead of resisting it. You listen when it whispers. You pause when it tenses. You give it water, breath, movement, love. Not because you're trying to make it look a certain way, but because you're finally learning how to live inside it. And that connection to your body becomes one of the most healing relationships you've ever had. Because your body has carried everything: the grief, the memories, the silence, the trauma. It's been holding you long before you knew how to hold yourself. And now you're learning how to say thank you. Not because your body's perfect, but because it's yours, because it's sacred, because it's home. You begin to see how everything is connected, how your mind is not separate from your heart, how your breath is not separate from your presence, how your pain is not separate from your growth. You begin to notice how your thoughts affect your energy, how your energy affects your choices, and how your choices shape your life. Not just in grand gestures, but in tiny, almost invisible moments. The moment you choose a kind thought over a cruel one. The moment you unclench your jaw instead of speaking from tension. The moment you forgive yourself for not being productive. The moment you allow yourself to want what you want without shame. These are not small moments. These are the turning points. These are the quiet revolutions that change the course of your life. Not with noise, but with truth. And in those moments, something awakens inside you. A kind of remembrance. A soul-deep knowing that says, I was never lost. I was always here. I just forgot how to hear myself. That remembrance brings with it a tenderness you may not have known before. You start to hold your past selves with compassion instead of contempt. You stop cringing at the old versions of you who didn't know better. You begin to thank them because they got you here. They survived the storm. They kept you alive long enough to learn how to thrive. And thriving doesn't mean constant joy or constant success. It means living in integrity. It means waking up and asking, what feels true today? And then having the courage to honor that truth. Even when it means disappointing others. Even when it means changing course. Even when it means starting over. Because now your loyalty is to your soul, not to your ego. You no longer live for applause. You live for alignment. You no longer hustle to be seen. You rest in the knowing that you already are. That shift changes everything. Your work, your relationships, your connection to the world. You stop trying to prove. You start trying to connect. You stop trying to impress. You start trying to feel. You stop trying to be right. You start trying to be real. And realness, that's where the sacred lives. In the rawness of your truth. In the trembling of your voice when you speak it. In the way your eyes water when you finally say the thing you've been holding in for years. In the way your hands shake when you start writing your own story instead of reading the one others handed you.